The room was cold. That's the first thing I remember, the cold. And the beeping. Slow. Steady. Indifferent. A machine tracking my heartbeat like it didn't care whether I lived or died. I wasn't supposed to be awake. The cardiologist had told me the twilight sedation would keep me comfortable and unaware during the cardiac catheterization. Comfortable. That's a generous word for having a tube threaded through an artery in your wrist up into your heart. But the sedation had worn thin. I could feel it fading like a tide going out, and I lay there on that table, eyes closed, unable to move, but hearing everything. That's when I heard my wife's voice. She wasn't supposed to be in that room. Family waits outside. Everyone knows that. But there she was, and she wasn't alone. "How much longer?" she said. Her voice was low, but I knew it the way you know the sound of your own front door. 20 minutes, maybe 30. A man's voice. Calm. Professional. "We're almost finished." "And you're sure he's out?" A pause. "He's sedated." "That's not what I asked, Robert." Robert. I had known Robert Ellison for 11 years. He had been my cardiologist for 9 of those years, ever since I turned 52 and my blood pressure started climbing. He had shaken my hand at my daughter's college graduation. He had sat across from me at the Morrison Foundation dinner 2 springs ago and told me I was one of the healthiest 61-year-olds he'd ever treated. I had trusted Robert Ellison with my heart, literally, and now I was lying on his table listening to him speak to my wife in a voice I had never heard him use before. Quiet, careful, intimate. "He won't remember anything," Robert said. "Not after the additional dose." "Good," my wife said. "Then we have time to talk." I kept my breathing slow. I focused everything I had on staying still, on keeping my eyelids from flickering. I was a retired federal prosecutor. I had spent 31 years watching people lie. And the one thing I had learned above everything else was this. When someone is about to reveal something they believe no one can hear, you go silent. You go completely, absolutely still. You become furniture. So I became furniture. "The account in the Caymans," she said. "Is it clean?" "It's clean. Wired through the Luxembourg holding, same as before." "He'll never find it. He's not as careless as you think." "He's been sick for 3 months, Claire. He's tired. He's not looking." My wife's name is Claire. Was Claire. Is Claire. Technically. Though that word wife already felt wrong, like a coat that no longer fit. She was 58 years old. We had been married for 29 years. We had a son who worked in Seattle and a daughter finishing her residency in Baltimore. We had a house in Fairfax County with a wraparound porch and a flagstone path I had laid myself over 3 weekends in the fall of 2019. We had a joint investment portfolio worth approximately $4.2 million, a figure I knew precisely because I had reviewed it 2 weeks before my cardiac episode, when I had started feeling that strange tightness in my chest, and my doctor had referred me to Ellison. I lay on that table and I thought, how long? Not how could she, not why, just how long. "The Fairfax account," she said, "moved. 60% to the Cayman structure, 40 into the trust vehicle we discussed. And the Morrison shares? Transferred last Thursday. All of it. The board doesn't know yet, but by the time anyone files a disclosure, you'll be... Don't." Her voice sharpened. "Don't say it out loud in here." Silence. Then the soft sound of movement, fabric against fabric, and I understood with a clarity that was almost physical that they were standing very close to each other. "After today," she said, "quieter now. We need 6 weeks. Maybe 8. I need it to look natural." "I know, and I need you to adjust his file. The stress test from October. Can you..." "Already done." I stopped breathing. Not figuratively. I actually stopped, for 3 full seconds. And the machine beside me stuttered, and the nurse on the other side of the room said, "Hold on," and everything paused. And I forced my chest to rise. Slowly, slowly, and the beeping settled back into its indifferent rhythm. Already done. He had already altered my medical records. I was a man with a documented heart condition because my cardiologist had decided to give me one. And my wife of 29 years, had asked him to. The procedure ended. They wheeled me to recovery. I lay in the dim room with an IV in my arm and a nurse checking my vitals every 15 minutes, and I stared at the ceiling and I did what I had always done in the worst moments of my career. I did not react. I did not move. I catalogued. What I knew, my wife and my cardiologist were in a financial conspiracy that had been running long enough to involve offshore accounts, trust vehicles, and a Luxembourg holding structure. She had transferred Morrison shares from the family foundation portfolio that required dual signatures, which meant she had forged mine, or had someone forge it. She had asked Ellison to alter medical records. She wanted something to look natural. She needed 6 to 8 weeks. I was a federal prosecutor for 31 years. I had built cases on less. What I did not know yet: how much was gone, how long this had been going on, whether there was anyone else involved, and most importantly, what exactly she meant by look natural. I thought about that phrase for a long time in the recovery room. I had experienced chest pains for 3 months. I had been referred to a cardiologist who was apparently not my cardiologist at all, but my wife's co-conspirator. I had been sedated and placed on a table while she stood in the same room and discussed transferring my assets. She needed 6 to 8 weeks, and she wanted it to look natural. I am 61 years old. I had a documented heart condition. The understanding arrived quietly, the way the worst things always do. My wife was not planning to leave me. She was planning to outlive me. I drove myself home that afternoon. The discharge nurse had asked if someone was picking me up, and I had said yes. My wife was waiting outside, and then I had walked to the parking structure and sat in my car for 20 minutes before I trusted my hands enough to drive. The steering wheel was cold. Everything was cold. I drove the 40 minutes home on autopilot, watching the Virginia suburbs blur past the windows, thinking about 31 years and a flagstone path and 2 children who did not know their mother was a stranger. I did not go inside when I got home. I sat in the driveway. Her car was there. I could see the kitchen light on through the window and her silhouette moving past it, and I thought, she has no idea. She thinks I'm sedated. She thinks I'm going to come inside and sit at the kitchen table and not remember a single thing. I almost went in. I almost walked through that door and looked her in the eye and said what I knew. 31 years of training pulled against 31 years of something else. Something older and quieter that didn't have a legal term. And for a moment I genuinely didn't know which one would win. But I was a prosecutor, and prosecutors build cases. I did not go inside. I called my daughter. She answered on the second ring, her voice still carrying that careful hospital calm she had developed in residency. "Dad, how did it go? How are you feeling?" "I'm all right," I said. "I need a favor. I need you to call your brother tonight. Both of you, I need you to stay where you are for the next few weeks, and I need you not to contact your mother directly if you can avoid it." A long pause. "Dad, I can't explain yet. I need you to trust me." Another pause. "My daughter is 28 years old, and she has her mother's eyes and my stubbornness, which is either a blessing or a curse depending on the day. Are you safe?" It was the right question. I thought about it honestly. "For now," I said. "Yes." "Okay," she said. "Okay, I trust you." I drove to a hotel that night and checked in under a name I hadn't used since 1998, a habit left over from a period of my career when certain defendants had made certain threats. I sat on the edge of a hotel bed with my laptop open and I started pulling threads. The Morrison Foundation portfolio was the first thing I checked. I had online access. It took me 4 minutes to confirm what I had heard on that table: 60% gone, moved in 3 separate wire transfers over the preceding 8 weeks. I had been sick for 3 months. While I was managing chest pains and scheduling cardiology appointments and doing stress tests that had apparently been falsified, my wife had been systematically disassembling the financial structure of our life together. I spent the next 4 hours making a list of everything I could verify and everything I couldn't. Then I called the one person I should have called years ago, my college roommate, a man who had spent 30 years as a forensic accountant before retiring to Charlottesville. I called him at 11 o'clock at night, and he answered because that's the kind of friend he was. "I need help," I said, "and I need it to stay quiet." "Tell me," he said. I told him. All of it. The room, the voices, the accounts, the Morrison shares, the phrase, "look natural." He listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him, and when I finished there was a silence long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "You said Ellison," he said finally. "Robert Ellison at Cardiology Associates?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I've seen his name before." He paused. "A client of mine, 4 years ago. Estate dispute. A widow. Her late husband had been Ellison's patient. The cold came back. How did the husband die? Heart failure, he said. Sudden, unexpected. He'd been treated for arrhythmia. The widow collected $4 million. I sat with that for a moment. Who was the widow? He told me a name I didn't recognize. But he also told me she had been driving a specific car, a detail that had come up in the estate dispute, a silver Mercedes S-Class, and I had seen that car in Ellison's parking lot twice in the past 2 months. I had assumed it belonged to a patient. I stopped sleeping that night. Not from fear, though that was present. From focus. There's a gear that clicks into place in certain situations. A narrowing of everything else, and I had felt it in courtrooms and interrogation rooms and once in a parking garage when a defendant's associate had put a hand on my arm. It clicked into place now. I was not going to be a case file. I was going to build one. My former colleague at the Department of Justice took my call the next morning, a Tuesday. She had prosecuted financial crimes for 20 years, and she owed me a favor that dated back to 2009. I did not tell her everything. I told her enough. By noon, she had run a preliminary check on Robert Ellison that confirmed he had incorporated 3 separate LLCs in Delaware over the past 6 years, 2 of which showed the same Luxembourg address I had overheard. By 3 o'clock, she had a name that appeared as registered agent on all 3 LLCs and on the trust vehicle my wife had mentioned. The name was not my wife's. It was a man named Gerald Marsh, an estate attorney in McLean, Virginia, whose office I had driven past 100 times without thinking about it. 3 people, not 2. I sat with my laptop in the hotel room and I spread it out in front of me like a map. Marsh handled the legal architecture, the LLCs, the trusts, the offshore structures. Ellison provided the medical component, the diagnosis, the records, the sedation, and presumably the eventual death certificate. My wife provided the target, the access, and the motive. Clean division of labor. The kind of conspiracy that takes time to build, which meant this wasn't new, which meant she had started planning this before I got sick, which meant the chest pains were the plan, not the trigger. I needed to know what she had given me, or what Ellison had given me, at her request, in the guise of treating me. I checked myself into a different hospital that afternoon, a hospital in Maryland with no connection to Ellison, and requested a full workup. A cardiologist I had never met reviewed my imaging and my labs and looked at me across the desk with the careful expression doctors use when they're about to revise something. "Your heart function is excellent," she said. "For a man your age, frankly, it's remarkable. I'm not sure where you got the arrhythmia diagnosis, but I don't see any evidence of it here." "Could someone have caused the chest pains I experienced?" I asked, medically. She looked at me for a long moment. "That's a very specific question." "I'm a retired federal prosecutor," I said. "Please answer it like one." She did. The answer was yes. There are several substances, some of them common, some of them prescription, that can produce chest pain, elevated cardiac markers, EKG irregularities. The effects are temporary if the exposure stops. They are detectable with the right testing. She ordered the right testing. The results came back 2 days later. There was a compound in my bloodstream that had no business being there. It had been introduced gradually small amounts, likely through something I ingested regularly, something my wife prepared, something my wife had been preparing for me every morning for months. My coffee. I had always had my coffee with 2 sugars and a single cup of my wife's homemade creamer, a habit she had started for me during a particularly stressful trial year, a small gesture of care I had never once questioned. 29 years. I had never once questioned it. The Maryland cardiologist made a phone call I had asked her to make. My former DOJ colleague made 2 more. By the end of that week, the investigation that had been informally building in a hotel room in Fairfax County became something formal and federal, with warrants and agents, and the particular machinery of justice that I had spent 3 decades helping to operate. I went home on a Thursday evening. My wife was in the kitchen when I walked in, and she turned from the counter with an expression of such practiced warmth that I had to take a breath before I could speak. "You're back," she said. "I've been so worried. Are you feeling better?" "Much better," I said. "The doctor said I'm actually very healthy." Something moved behind her eyes, just briefly. A small recalibration. "That's wonderful," she said. "Isn't it?" I said. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her make dinner, and I thought about the flagstone path and my daughter's voice on the phone saying, "I trust you," and I kept my expression neutral and my hands steady, and I did not accept the coffee she offered me. The federal agents came on a Monday morning. My wife had underestimated two things: how quickly forensic accountants can reconstruct wire transfer trails when they know what they're looking for, and how thoroughly a retired federal prosecutor can document a case when he has 3 weeks, a hotel room, and 31 years of experience with people who thought they were untouchable. Gerald Marsh was arrested at his office in McLean at 8 in the morning. Robert Ellison was arrested in the parking lot of his practice at 8:15. My wife was arrested in our kitchen at 8:30, still in her robe, holding a cup of coffee she had made for herself. I watched from the driveway. I had been asked to stay outside during the arrest, and I had agreed, because I had spent 3 weeks working toward this moment, and I did not need to be inside the house to feel it resolve. She looked at me through the kitchen window as the agents came through the door. Just once. A long look. I don't know what she expected to see in my face. Shock, maybe. Grief. Something she could use. I kept my expression the way I had kept it in that recovery room, in that hotel room, on every day of those 3 weeks. Still. Patient. Present. I did not look away until the agents had her in the car. The investigation expanded over the following months in the way that serious financial crimes tend to expand outward, finding new surfaces. The widow my accountant friend had mentioned became a second victim in a federal filing. Ellison's patient records from a 6-year period were subpoenaed and reviewed. 2 additional former patients with sudden cardiac deaths were flagged for reinvestigation. Gerald Marsh began cooperating almost immediately, which was unsurprising. Structural architects always think they can negotiate from the outside of a conspiracy. He was wrong, but his cooperation accelerated everything. My wife did not cooperate. She hired a very expensive attorney and maintained, for several months, a comprehensive silence that I found almost professionally admirable. She had always been composed. It was one of the things I had loved about her. Early on, that steadiness, that refusal to be rattled. In a different life, it would have been a virtue. The trial lasted 11 days. I testified on the second day, and I sat in the witness box and answered questions in the same deliberate cadence I had used for 3 decades on the other side of the courtroom. And I did not look at my wife while I testified because I had learned long ago that looking at someone in that moment is more about the witness than the case, and the case was what mattered. She was convicted on 4 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, which carries a weight in language that the financial charges don't. Ellison received a longer sentence because of the second victim and the revoked medical license, and because federal judges tend to respond to doctors who weaponize the trust of the vulnerable with a particular kind of gravity. Marsh received the least, as cooperating architects often do, which is the deal he made and will have to live with. I drove home from the courthouse on the last day of sentencing, and I sat on the porch for a long time without going inside. The flagstone path needed repointing. I had noticed it weeks ago and not gotten around to it. It was October, and the light was doing what it does in October in Virginia, that low amber angle that makes ordinary things look like they matter. The maples in the front yard had gone red. My daughter had flown up from Baltimore the night before, and she was inside making something that smelled like the chili I used to make when she was a teenager, following a recipe I had taught her one fall weekend that I had half forgotten. My son called while I was sitting on the porch. He was in Seattle, and he had been in Seattle through all of it. He had wanted to come, had pushed several times to come, and I had asked him to stay. Not because I didn't want him there, but because I needed to do this in a particular way, in a particular order, and I needed to know my children were somewhere safe while I did it. "It's done," I told him. "I know," he said. I watched the sentencing online. A pause. "How are you, Dad?" Actually, I thought about the question. The honest version was complicated in a way I didn't have language for yet. 29 years is not something you process in a courthouse parking lot. It is not something you process on a porch in October either. Maybe it's not something you process at all. In the way we usually mean that word, maybe it's just something you carry differently over time, the weight redistributing itself until you forget it's there. "I'm outside," I said. "The maples are good this year." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah? Yeah. You should come see them." "I'll book a flight tonight," he said. I sat on the porch until the light went flat, and my daughter called me in for dinner, and I went inside to the warm kitchen and the smell of chili, and I sat at the table I had sat at for 29 years, and it was the same table in a different life, and I was 61 years old and I was still here. That matters more than people think. just being still here. There is a thing that happens when you spend a long time in prosecution. In the machinery of consequences and evidence and measured justice, you start to believe that outcomes are clean. That there is a verdict, and then there is after the verdict, and after the verdict, things are resolved, tied off. That's the story we tell about justice. The story I told for 31 years. But I was also the man who had lain on that table, listening. I was the man who had driven home and sat in his driveway and almost gone inside. I was the man who had watched his wife through a kitchen window and felt something that was not only anger, not only vindication. The human part of it that doesn't resolve. It doesn't receive a sentence and close. It lives in the flagstone path and the kitchen table in the particular way the light comes through the front window in the late afternoon, and you learn, slowly, to live alongside it. My daughter stayed for 10 days. My son came the following weekend and stayed for 2 weeks, and the three of us were in that house together for the first time in years. And it was strange in the way that true things are strange, not comfortable, not easy, but real in a way that comfort and ease aren't quite. We repointed the flagstone path on a Saturday afternoon in November. All three of us, in old clothes, with bags of mortar and a tutorial on YouTube that my son pulled up on his phone. It took most of the day, and we did parts of it wrong, and we argued about the right consistency for the mortar, and my daughter got it on her jacket and refused to admit she minded. By the time we finished, the light was gone, and we were cold, and the path looked, objectively, much better. We stood at the end of it and looked back at the house. "It looks good," my son said. "It does," I said. And it did. That was the thing. Despite everything, despite the cold, and the 31 years, and the cardiac catheterization table in the room that I still sometimes woke up in at 3 in the morning before I remembered where I actually was, it looked good. The path was solid. The house was standing. The maples had lost their leaves by then, but the branches held their shape against the gray November sky, patient and structural, ready for whatever came next. I went inside. My daughter was already in the kitchen. I could hear her moving around, opening the refrigerator, running water, the ordinary sounds of someone at home in a house. My son came in behind me and kicked off his boots at the door, the same spot he had always used since he was 12 years old. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went to help with dinner.